Okay, today we're going to talk about Project Gemini. Now, Project Gemini is oftentimes referred to as the bridge to the moon because it's sort of the bridge between Project Mercury, which basically just got people into space, and Project Apollo, which was much more complicated, which got eventually men to the moon. Project Gemini, as I just said, was the second manned spaceflight program between Mercury and Apollo, and oftentimes it's kind of thought of as the forgotten program, although in many ways it's the most interesting of the three. Let's take a look at the space capsule. So this is the Gemini capsule, which is the little piece that goes on top of the rocket that holds the people. The Gemini capsule can hold 2 people instead of 1, which means that one person can fly the spacecraft while another person can go out and perform missions. The other improvement over the Mercury capsule is that the Gemini capsule actually has thrusters, and so it can move from side to side, forward and back, and so on. And that allowed for some of the things that I'm going to talk about. All the Gemini missions used the Titan II rocket. It was a 2-stage rocket, which meant that the bottom half would burn up all of its fuel and then fall away, and then the top half would ignite a second rocket. And the reason there were stages on rockets was that you could drop half your weight part way through your mission, your flight into space, and then the second half of the rocket wouldn't have to lift as much weight, because there's no sense carrying the bottom half of the rocket once it's out of fuel, because most of the rocket is effectively just a giant fuel tank. So when you separate it into 2 pieces, the second half can go a lot farther because it doesn't have to lift as much weight. So that's why we have 2-stage rockets, and eventually 3 and maybe even 4, I think. All right, Gemini 3 was the first manned mission of the program. So Gemini 1 and 2, they just practiced, to make sure that the spacecraft would get into space and maintain pressure and things like that. So Gemini 3 was the first one where they actually sent people up. And then Gemini 4 was the first time ever that an American got out of a spacecraft and walked in space, or floated, because you don't really walk out there. And this is a picture of him. This is Ed White. If you'd like to see a video of this, you can go on YouTube and search for Gemini 4 or Ed White spacewalk, and you can actually watch this happen. Another first for the Gemini program, Gemini 6 and 7, which were separate spacecraft and took off, I believe, a day apart. It might have been hours apart, but I think it was a day apart, would actually go up in space separately and then find each other. And so here is the view of one of the capsules. I don't know which one we're looking at in the picture, 6 or 7, being taken. The picture's being taken from the other Gemini spacecraft. So this is back in 1965. This, I believe, we did before the Russians, so I think we were the first ones to actually have 2 spacecraft meet up in space. And this was necessary because we were going to need this when we went to the moon, because when we got to the moon, only a very small spacecraft would go down to the moon, and then when it came back up, it would have to rendezvous with the bigger mothership, as they like to call it, before the men could come home. All right, so far we did spacewalk, and we did rendezvous. Now, Gemini 8, they not only rendezvoused, this time with an unmanned craft, it was just a spy satellite that they sent up there, but they actually docked with it. So they went up in space, again found the other spacecraft, but this time they actually connected to it, and they were able to control the other spacecraft called the Agena, and so on and so forth. There was a mishap during this, and you can look up Gemini 8 if you want to look into that. Gemini 9 was another spacewalk, this time Gene Cernan. This time, instead of just floating in space, they wanted him to actually accomplish some things, but it didn't go very well. And what they found out was that spacewalks are very hard, because as you would try to turn a valve to open it, your body would spin the opposite direction, right? This is Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's actually for every action force, there's an equal and opposite reaction force. And so the same thing, you'd try to push a button, and then you'd get pushed backwards. And when there's nothing to hold you still, and you're just floating around on the outside of spacecraft, every time you try to push or pull something, your body gets thrown in the other direction. So Buzz Aldrin was selected for the last Gemini mission, Gemini 12. And they had a couple more attempts at these spacewalks, and they didn't go very well. And the idea was thought, well, why don't we practice underwater? And this way we can practice basically in zero gravity, right? Because when you're underwater, you're kind of floating, and so it's similar to being in space. And practicing underwater, they realized things like they need handholds and footholds to be able to work, and they really solved a lot of these problems. And on Gemini 12, Buzz Aldrin had a very successful EVA, or spacewalk. And then that was, of course, one of the last things we needed to accomplish before we could send men to the moon, because they would have to be able to get out of the spacecraft and do things from time to time. All right, that's it. If you have any questions, type them at the bottom. Thank you.